Cassidy. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. I'm a Driscoll. The Driscolls are from County Cork in Ireland. Last Friday, if you remember, we presented Ambassador Catherine Ebert-Gray, who spoke to us about her rise through the ranks of the Foreign Service to eventually becoming the United States' ambassador to New Guinea. She was remarkable. Today's program is an appropriate sequel to that. Maria Encarnacion Berkenkotter is with us to talk about her journey from being the stepdaughter of a middle school janitor to becoming one of 7 justices on the Colorado Supreme Court. Many of you know Justice Berkenkotter from her years of service on the Boulder County District Court, where she eventually served as the chief judge. In November of 2020, Governor Polis appointed Maria Berkenkotter to serve on the Colorado Supreme Court. Justice Berkenkotter, we're thrilled that you're here. Thank you.
I'm a lot shorter. Let me start off by saying thank you to David for that lovely introduction. The picture that was up there just absolutely terrifies me. So thank you also, David, for the invitation to be here. Can you all hear me okay? Am I okay? Come closer. How are we doing? How's that? I was meant to have a job with a microphone, and it's also, I'm one of those people that I like pace and talk, but I think because of the Zoom and for many reasons, even though I was graciously offered a microphone, I'm going to try and stay put. It is really my pleasure to be here and to have a chance to talk with all of you. I brought some notes. I normally don't speak with notes. The reason that I brought notes today is I need to have a root canal. They can't get me until next Wednesday. And so I thought, well, if I start to lose a little focus, this will help me. Before I dive in and tell you just a little bit about my sort of unusual path to the Colorado Supreme Court, I always like to know a little bit about who I am speaking with. So by show of hands, how many folks in the legal profession? Okay. How many folks are scientists or former scientists or both? All right. Folks associated with CU in some capacity? Thank you, thank you. And let's go for CPAs or otherwise in financial universe. Lots and lots of folks. All right, thank you. And I'm sorry if educators. Yeah, there we go. Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask you, if it feels okay to you, to close your eyes for like 15 seconds. And I want you to think about the word judge. And if you're a visual thinker, I want you to sort of lock on to what you see. And if you're sort of more of a list making less visual, I want you to sort of just think about what's on that list. Okay, thank you. Now, I'm not going to call out on anybody because I don't want to put anybody on the spot. But I'm going to start off by explaining that when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a judge. And I have no idea why. There weren't any lawyers in my family. There weren't any judges in my family. I don't even think I knew even remotely what a judge did. My family didn't have a TV for most of my childhood. And it turns out that that might have been a good thing because when I was a kid, most judges were much older white men. There were a few middle-aged white men. There were almost no women, and there were almost no people of color. There were a lot of other things, and I guess now is a good moment, since I just said that, to ask you to just reflect internally on when I said judge, what was the image that came up in your mind? Or what were sort of the lists of qualities, okay? So there were a lot of other things when I was a kid I also didn't know, and that turned out probably to be a good thing. Back then, the path to the bench for most people involved going to college, usually a prestigious college, followed by law school, usually a prestigious law school, followed by private practice, usually at a prestigious firm. Sometimes folks came out of the district attorney's office or the U.S. attorney's office, but for the most part, that was sort of the rigid path. Now, there's nothing wrong with that path. A lot of amazing, amazing, amazing lawyers and judges have gone down that path. But if I had known that when I was a little kid, I don't know that I would be standing here today. I get asked to talk a fair amount about my journey because I think people these days like to hear that there are other paths, and mine was definitely one of them. We also, quite frankly, need judges that have different kinds of life experiences and look different for many, many reasons for our courts and for our communities. So I'm going to walk through 10 quick mile markers about my path to the bench. First off, my family. There was my family, I grew up in a really, really, really eccentric, kind of chaotic household. My parents had us when we were really, really young. My dad was obsessed with this, he was an artist and a poet, and he was really obsessed with this ancient Chinese game called Go. My mother and my stepdad loved school, so much so that they were on the long-term academic plan. We moved a lot. It took my mother 16 years to complete her PhD. My poor stepdad, who ended up working in a middle school as a night janitor, never was able to finish his PhD. Without his work and his support of my family, I most certainly would not be here. Just in case you think I'm exaggerating about my family, though, being a little eccentric, because everybody's family is eccentric, right? How many of you think your family, like of origin, was eccentric? Okay, we have at least 50%. That's low for many of the groups I speak with. Any of you have a raccoon when you were growing up? As a pet? Was it wild? After everything went sideways with that raccoon, did your family get a second one and do the same thing all over again? Yeah, okay. I rest my case. So, I go off to college when I was 17. My family didn't have money to send me. I was very fortunate. I went to Western Michigan University. I say that proudly because for a long time, I didn't feel that way because my friends had gone off to University of Michigan and fancy schools all over the place. Well, we couldn't afford that. I went to Western because I got a full ride academic scholarship and because I worked as an RA in the dorms for 3 of the 4 years I was there. I went off to DU Law School, full of excitement about becoming a lawyer. And as I was walking in my first day, I walked by a parking lot and I think to myself, that's the faculty parking lot. It must be because there are all these BMWs and Mercedes and Audis. At the time, I drove, who remembers Ford Pinto station wagons? The ones that like caught on fire spontaneously. That's what I drove, right? Yeah, so I was intimidated. Like for the first time in my life, I was intimidated and I could sort of feel imposter syndrome sort of creeping in, only I didn't know that that's what it was. Law school for me was a wonderful, invigorating, challenging time of growth. The first time I ever got a grade back, it was horrible. It was horrible. And it made, my first thought was, I don't belong here. I don't belong here. And fortunately, I was so lucky I had a professor, the professor for the class where I was bombing, who spent time with me and who helped me understand, you know, sort of what I was doing wrong. It turned out, having moved a lot as a kid, and there were just these huge gaps. I didn't even know how to study, right? So it was the first time in my life I went from all A's to really doing very poorly. But that setback was an incredible gift for me because it helped me see that the failure wasn't really exactly a failure. I mean, it felt like a failure. I had to get over that initial reaction and learn to sit with that discomfort. But I learned that if I could sit with that discomfort of feeling like a fraud, I could work my way through with the support and assistance of other people to get to a better place. My next mile marker, my fourth one, was I had a non-religious miracle happen at the end of my first year of law school. There was a Denver District Court judge named Paul Markson. Paul had a law clerk who wanted to go help his family on the family farm, and Paul hired me at the end of my first year of law school to be his temporary law clerk for the summer. Now, these are jobs that normally go to lawyers, not to law students and not to first-year law students. But he saw something, and I have no idea what, but he saw something in me. And it was really an extraordinary experience. And part of it was just getting out of the classroom, where in ways I felt less prepared, and getting into a real environment where I saw people trying real cases affecting real lives, judges doing real things, and getting to see what lawyers actually do. And that, for me, was a real turning point. His clerks also really took me under their wings and taught me a lot of important things, like don't ever make the clerks mad. For lawyers, you know that's an important lesson. I then went on mile marker 5. I ended up after law school clerking for Howard Kirshbaum. He was, or it still is, he's still alive. He was a justice on my current court, on the Colorado Supreme Court. And again, I was just very lucky to have such a great mentor, and who helped me, though, because I had that very same experience. Because on an appellate court, particularly the Supreme Court, it's a much deeper dive that you have to take. And in the beginning, it kind of took me a while to get the hang of it. And it took me a while to realize Justice Kirshbaum wasn't criticizing me. He was trying to help me become a better writer, a better thinker, and quite frankly, because of his tutelage, probably, I hope, a better person. He's really an extraordinary human. I went on to the Attorney General's office from there. Actually, that's not quite right. I went into private practice for a couple of years from there, and that was wonderful. I learned a million different things. I also learned, though, that if I stayed in that private practice, I wasn't going to get to do any kind of the hands-on work that I had seen happening in the trial court, and that's what I really kind of hungered to do. So I left. I went to the Attorney General's office. Eventually, I handled antitrust cases there. That was a stroke of great fortune because you have just this wide jurisdiction you get to do. In state court, you have civil jurisdiction, but you also have criminal jurisdiction. So I got to run cases through the statewide grand jury. Most of my own practice was in U.S. District Court in New York and in Washington, D.C., and that gave me a wonderful sort of kind of experience. And it's also a very supportive environment for young attorneys. So that was a tremendous growth opportunity. The thread that runs through so many of these things I've talked about up to this point are really just the good fortune of having people in my lives at various points along these mile markers who were willing to spend time with me. And back then, nobody called it mentoring. I never went to anybody and said, will you be my mentor? And nobody ever came to me and said, can I be your mentor? But that's what was happening. That's what we call it now. I was very, very lucky. Mile marker 8, I decided after a bunch of years at the Colorado Attorney General's office, and I eventually there ended up running antitrust and consumer protection and all of tobacco litigation. I decided it was time to try and become a judge. Pardon me. And that was a wonderful, extraordinary, and humbling experience. I applied in 2002. I was thrilled. I made the short list. That was the name of 3 people that go to the governor. Dee Mallard, a wonderful human, a wonderful judge, was appointed, not me. I applied in 2004. I got on the short list. I was thrilled. I thought, maybe this time. Jamie Klein, a wonderful human, also a good friend, a terrific judge, was appointed. The path to the bench is definitely not an easy one, and it is not a direct one. 2006, I finally, third time was a charm, and I was appointed by Governor Owens. I will pause for a moment and say one of the things I'm most proud about, of many, is that I was appointed to the district court by Governor Owens. I was appointed to the Colorado Supreme Court by by Governor Polis, so a Republican and a Democrat. My time at the Boulder District Court was a gift. I was on the district court bench for 11 years. I was the chief judge the last 4.5 years of that time. I got to preside over every kind of case that the district court can throw at you. Serious felonies, complicated civil cases, domestic relations matters, probate, mental health, juvenile, you name it, I did it. I had a terrific, terrific group of colleagues. Being a judge, being a trial court judge in particular, but being a judge, it is an amazing job. It is a wonderful job. It is a hard job, and it can be a lonely job because you and you alone have to decide everything that you have to decide. And again, that's particularly so in the trial court. As a chief judge, I was really lucky to get to work with a lot of folks who were very motivated in a very Boulder way to look at the system and figure out, are there things that we can do better? For instance, should we keep truancy in the court system and bring 11-year-olds and 14-year-olds in? And if they don't go to school, should we really send them to detention? Is that a good thing? Or should we create some other different process? There were a number of things that we did to try and sort of improve the system and ultimately improve outcomes for the lives of the folks who ended up in front of us. I left the district court at the end of 2017. And let me see how I'm doing for time. How am I doing for time? I'm okay? I don't usually talk about this too much, so I'm going to talk about it fast. 2 years before, my sister, my only sister, my younger sister, my sister who was 13 months younger than me, died after a 5-year-long battle with ovarian cancer. Less than a year later, my mother died of the same disease. Did I mention that my sister died on the 10-year anniversary of our father's death? So there had just been like loss after loss after loss after loss. And for me, it really triggered this profound period of both grief, but also sort of introspection and sort of looking within. And what did I really want to do? I had been a district court judge for 11 plus years. I certainly could have stayed for another 20 and done that. I had been chief judge for 4.5 years. We'd done a million things. Did I really, was there still work to be done? And I eventually decided that as much as I loved all that, I really wanted to challenge myself to do something else. So I left. I spent 3 years working at a place called Judicial Arbiter Group, which is it's all the retired and former judges that you would want to know and hang out with. I did a lot of mediation. I did a lot of arbitration, and folks who knew me well and knew that I had an interest in ultimately trying to be on the Colorado Supreme Court said, we're so excited for you, we're so happy for you, and you're nuts. Because you've basically just killed this piece of your dream. And that's fine because you're going to get to do all these other wonderful things, but you really have, like if this is what you really want to do, you've shot yourself in the foot. Because again, sort of going back to where I started and coming full circle, there is this sort of very rigid sort of lockstep idea of the path to various places that people want to go in law, particularly when you want to become a judge and particularly when you want to become a justice. Fortunately for me, there was an opening that came up in the end of the summer of 2020, so full COVID, interviewed with a nominating commission over Zoom. That was the strangest experience. I was lucky I made the short list. Everybody's saying to me, well, this is great, but again, don't worry, it's not going to happen because you shot yourself in the foot when you left the district court. And I'm just thinking, okay, well, we'll see. I interviewed with the governor and some folks from his staff at the governor's mansion. It's the middle of November 2020, so again, full COVID, resurgence. We sat outside at a table that was as big as half of this room. I was this far away from the governor. The person at the end of the table, I was like that far, the gentleman in the hat, and went through the interview, and it was a very surreal experience. Fortunately, I'm standing here as the newest member of the Colorado Supreme Court. I was appointed by the governor, I think on November 18th maybe of 2020. I was sworn in on January the 4th. I can tell you that my job is you'll notice a theme, but it's an amazing job. It's every day is interesting, every day is hard. We decide cases for the most part of first impression, where there is no law that you can look to anywhere else, and so you're having to kind of figure it out well, not on the fly. That would be a complete mischaracterization. But every day is interesting, and every day is hard. I'm trying to keep an eye on time. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, and I appreciate whenever I have the chance to talk to folks at least a little bit about my story and my path to my current job. I think about myself as that little girl, so many years ago, and I know that there are little girls, little boys, little kids, there are young people who, again, the dominant narrative is, even now, sort of that you need to do these things to get to the bench. And I think that has changed somewhat over time. I think COVID, interestingly, has actually kind of accelerated that change. But I think there's still a lot of misconceptions. So I appreciate having the chance to come and talk to you. If you have that little kid in your life, and they are sassy and argumentative and full of energy, and they say to you they want to be a lawyer or they want to be a judge, and you're thinking, I don't know, tell them go for it. My little kid self thanks you on their behalf. Are there questions?
Your Honor, a question. Assuming that there are no cases before you now, what do you think about the independent state legislature theory?
So that is a brilliant question, and I can't answer it. I can't answer it, and here's why. And I apologize. I should have probably said before I start taking questions, I'm the most boring person in the world. And it's because if I was at your house having dinner, or if I bumped into you at a cocktail party, you're going to want to know things like that. Or what do I think about, another one that keeps on coming up, are the approach, let's say, in, sort of the entire post-Hobbes universe, right, and state abortion issues. The issue you're talking about isn't currently in front of us, but I can't speak to it because it's so political. I can't speak to some of those other kinds of things because they will end up in the state Supreme Courts are the next battleground for all those issues. But it's a great question, and I thank you for it. Yes?
So I know a little bit about the United States Supreme Court, but I know very little about the Colorado Supreme Court.
Yes.
And I'm just kind of curious what the ratio is of like reading and writing, behind the scenes, closed doors, and that which is, person to person, as we perceive it in black robes, listening to an argument and stuff like that.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that is a great question, and I'm really happy to be able to answer it. So when people think, when you think of that judge, I asked you to think about a judge, you probably thought about a judge wearing a black robe on the bench. And that certainly is a piece of how we spend our time. We do hear oral argument, and it's just really one of the greatest things about the job. It's so much fun. But that is really a fraction of our time. We probably spend 75, each of us, and then there's little variations, and there's 7 of us altogether. We probably spend 75% of our time on things that are related to issuing the 1,500 or so, plus or minus, decisions that go out a year. And some of those are just like one word denied, and some of them are 40 pages or 50-page opinions, okay? Another 25% ends up being spent in sort of more of an administrative, operational kind of side, trying to make sure that the branch as a whole is getting run the way that we want it to be run. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yes, sir.
Yes, I saw on the camera the other day where some folks from Colorado filed a case in Connecticut for the manufacturer of the gun that was used in the mass killing at King Super. So my question is this: is there any way in Colorado that anybody can be held criminally responsible in a mass shooting other than the person who pulled the trigger?
Well, I defer in certain ways to some of the lawyers in the room who have done work, right, involving sort of personal, trying to sort of hold other folks accountable. I can think of certain theories that people could posit to try and sort of impose vicarious liability. I'm not speaking specifically to that case because I absolutely can't, and I quite frankly have to be pretty vague about the law too, because these are exactly the kind of questions, the really interesting hard questions that we end up grappling with. But I can imagine a few theories that people might try and pursue.
Thank you. We have a question online from Carl. Hello, Carl. Carl, you're muted. All right. We'll come to Carl after we come to Bill.
I'm sorry.
Carl, you're
muted.
muted.
Yeah. Thank you. I apologize. Justice Berkenkotter, we're hearing a lot these days about elections in other states, very expensive, special election in Wisconsin to fill their Supreme Court. And could you just comment on the selection system in Colorado and how it differs from a lot of other states?
This is an amazing group. Your questions are fantastic. Carl, thank you for that question. So Colorado is one of a number of states, but it's a small and shrinking number, I'm afraid to say, that has what's called merit selection. We do not have politically contested elections. And in my view, that's a really good thing. Like, I can't have yard signs, I can't, donate money. The way it works here is if you're interested in being a judge, there is an application process. You apply to a local nominating commission. The nominating commission is made up of lawyers and non-lawyers from your community, from your judicial district. And if you're lucky, you get an interview. Oh, and by the way, there's a balance between Republicans and Democrats on these nominating commissions. If you're lucky, you get an interview. If you're really lucky, you end up on what's called the short list, which is a list of 3 names, usually 3, that is sent to the governor, and then the governor ends up selecting from those 3 names. And the idea behind our system is to keep politics out of the process.
Great.
Justice, thanks for coming to speak with us today. I'm not going to ask you some of the questions that I might otherwise because I know you can't answer them. But instead I'll ask, I think the Supreme Court hears something like 70 cases a year. Each judge obviously has multiple clerks. Could you talk a little bit about Colorado's system? How many cases you all hear in a year? How many clerks you have working with you? Just a bit about the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. That's excellent. So we get cases, for the most part, 2 different ways. One are through the certiorari process, which are appeals from usually the Court of Appeals, but it can be from the district court. We also get what are called interlocutory appeals, and those come like in the middle of a case before the case is done. The first category, certiorari, the cases are all done. Those cases, only cert cases for the most part do we hold oral argument, and those cases are more visible and tend to get more media attention because of the oral argument, but there are all these other cases that we're also deciding. We also have a little bit of what's called original jurisdiction, water cases, election cases, certain kinds of cases coming out of the PUC. The court as a whole, although we're sort of affected also by this sort of pandemic dynamic, but as a whole, normally, on average, we issue about 100 opinions. This past year, we issued less, but again, there's sort of this weird pandemic thing that is going on. We're really lucky in terms of staffing. We each get to hire 3 law clerks, and they are often the best and the brightest, although there's lots of ways to measure the best and the brightest. Does that answer your question? Thanks. Yes.
Hey, Justice Berkenkotter.
Yeah.
So I used to work at the DA's office, and one of the things that we had to deal with all the time was people thinking that forensics took like an hour to get done, and it was perfect. We would have DNA results on absolutely everything. You understand? So my question is, are there things like that that happen with perceptions about the Supreme Court, the Colorado Supreme Court, and is there something that you think that people really should know about the work that you do that we don't know, that we might not be able to know?
Yeah. Another amazing question. So you started off with the why isn't there DNA evidence in the dog at large case, and that's something that you didn't have DNA evidence in that dog at large case. Yeah. Nor the minor in possession, nor most cases, right? Yeah. I think that. I think there are misconceptions about the work we do. I think the fact that the court live streams oral argument is a really, really, really good thing, because you can get online, go to cocourts.gov, I think, and every month when we're in oral argument, it's telecast in real time. There are also recordings, and you can go and see what we are hearing, and it's a very, I encourage you to do this. It's a really, I'm gonna say, lively process. If you were the lawyer doing the oral argument, it might not feel lively. That might not be the word that you would pick or the word that Bill would pick but it's a hot bench. There's lots and lots and lots of questions that get asked. I think that there is less of a mystery now that at least oral argument is out there, but there is still a whole world of things that we do that we don't do in public, right? We have conference every Thursday morning, and it's almost all Thursday morning, and we go through cases, and we have these lengthy discussions about, how to rule. And our custom, just to mention this, is we sit in a particular order. Our court is very hierarchical, like much of law. The Chief Justice sits at the end of the table. Next is most junior, me, and then next most junior, then next most junior, all the way around. And the person who has to vote first is the most junior. So for the past 2 years, every Thursday, I have to vote first. And then by the time you're on the other side of the table, you may have things to add, and that's great, but you also might be able to just say, well, I agree with everything so-and-so said. Or you might even be able to just say, me too. So as the most junior, I want everybody to know that. I'm just kidding about that. And so that's not something that's seen. I guess the only other thing I would say is, I think in certain ways anyway, I'm very lucky. The court is a very collegial court. Our job isn't to agree with each other. Our job isn't even to get along. It's important to be collegial, and it is important to get along for many, many, many reasons. And I loved the thing you went through at the very beginning. That completely resonated with me. But these are people who you're going to be working with for years and years, decades sometimes, right? I'm going to agree with you completely on case A. And then a month later, case B is going to come around, and you're going to be in the majority, and I'm going to be in the dissent position, and I'm going to think that you are as wrong can be. And I'm going to have to find a way, going around the table, to respectfully explain to you why I think that position is wrong, as I try to get the people on your side to my side, and to keep the people on my side. And then, a week later, it's going to play out in some other configuration. So it's the human dynamics and the human element are fascinating.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Justice, for speaking today.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask if there are and I was trying to think of the way to word this question, but with such a rapidly changing world with technology and disease with COVID and just many things that seem to be changing so fast, are there ways that, or checks and balances, where the Supreme Court is able to adapt to different circumstances? Are there systems in place for those changes?
Yeah, thank you. Fantastic question. And there are many reasons it's a fantastic question. Our state Supreme Courts tend to be institutions of tradition, and for lots of good reasons, right? You think about precedent, and you don't want the law, right, changing every 2 weeks just, because I feel like it, or I changed my mind, or, oh, there's a different justice, and we're just gonna change it to change it. I think that COVID, as horrible as been for people, so much loss, acknowledging that there have been in the judicial branch as a whole, including our court, things that have come out of it that have been positive. Our court has started to, we have to sort of get all the technology worked out, but it's really expensive if you're in Grand Junction and you have a case in front of our court. You as a lawyer may or may not want to take the time, spend the money, or incur the cost, right, of flying or driving for what may be an oral argument. By the time you're done, it's an hour long, right? And so we've opened up ways to sort of make that possible. If you're a parent with a sick child and all of a sudden, you can't get, even if you're in Lakewood, you can't get to downtown, but you have enough coverage to at least do your argument, right? There are opportunities there. We're again, in sort of more of our oversight role with respect to the branch as a whole, we've been looking at just how important some of those virtual appearances are for access to justice issues. So for instance, if you're a trial court judge and there's an arraignment docket, and you've got a litigant who needs to be there with their lawyer, and it's literally going to be like a 3-minute long appearance, but there are 70 people on the docket. And so if you are unlucky and you're at the end of the docket, you might have to sit there and, for 2 hours or 3 hours. Well, if you're somebody who had to take a bus and then sit there and then take the bus, it's just, it's terrible. So for us, there have been some silver linings in terms of, I think, access to justice and making what we do more transparent. I hope that answered the question.
Justice Berkenkotter, thank you for coming and welcome to Boulder Rotary.
Thank you all.
As a judge, I think you're familiar with the concept of privilege. And I have a couple of privileges today. First, I'm now retired, and so when I address a judge, I don't have to wear a tie. The second privilege is, as a Boulder Rotarian, our club gets the last word, and I've been asked to exercise that privilege. You mentioned earlier the merit selection system here in Colorado, and I've spoken to lawyers and judges around the world and extolled the virtues of the merit selection system here. Your path, as you've described it to us, exemplifies why that merit selection process is so important. And it's because of judges like you and your colleagues, both here on the Boulder County bench, 20th Judicial District, and the other courts in the state, that make the system work. And for that, we thank you. Those of us, both lawyers, retired lawyers, but everybody in this room. What you do makes the rule of law breathe and live and be real. And for that, we thank you. And as an expression of our thanks, as you may know, Boulder Rotary and Rotary International has been involved for many years in eradicating polio. And as we love to say, and we've said for far too long, we're this close. But in your honor, we will donate 100 doses of polio vaccine, the Polio Plus campaign, and a small token of our appreciation. Thank you again for coming, and best of luck on the court.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.